may I just remind you we're in the election purdah period, so all bicycle chains, knives and machetes to be left at the door. I have received one apology only from Councillor Ken Richardson. Have we got any others? No? Angie Mornby. Thank you very much. I'd like to welcome, first of all, Councillor Ken Rustage from Oldham, who's travelled all the way over here to see how we operate a planning committee. Whether he'll learn anything from that or not, I don't know, but we'll see. And also John Shaw, who is our new Southern Area, head of the Southern Area planning team, who's sitting over here. The first item on the agenda is the minutes of the meeting held on the 10th of May. I've had a look through those and I'm happy to move them from the chair as an accurate record. That's seconded. Has anybody got any comments on the accuracy of the minutes? In that case, all those in favour of their adoption? Anyone against? That is carried. Thank you. I have no urgent business. Public participation occurs as we go through the agenda. Members' declarations of interest. I do not have any to declare. Have any members got any declarations of interest? Okay, that I think is the first, actually. That's good. So we're moving on to agenda item 6, which is the bungalow at Macclesfield Road, Kettleshume. Who's introducing this, John? We've got two Johns. That's going to be confusing. John Keeley, would you introduce it for us, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. This is a full planning application for the demolition of the existing house and the construction of a new 3-bedroom dwelling, including new retaining wall structure at the bungalow, Macclesfield Road, Kettleshume. The site plan is on the new larger screen behind us, which should aid visibility for members and the public. It's sited on the north side of Macclesfield Road, and which is the road from Whaley Bridge up to Kettleshume. The site is sat just below the level of the road because the land falls away as you move away from the main road towards the north. So this is the application site in red. It's in the open countryside. There's just the beginnings of the outskirts of Kettleshume on the left-hand side of this slide. And looking at photographs to show you the landscape context. This is the site, the bungalow. You see how it sits below the level of the road. As we go through the slides, note the planning history. We did grant planning permission back in 2021 for alterations and extensions to this house. That's not been implemented. And this proposal, as I've said, is demolition of the existing house and replacement dwelling. The replacement dwelling is largely identical to the alterations and extension scheme that we approved back in 2021. But you'll note from the report that this being a demolition is a materially different development to the alteration and extensions one, and therefore a whole different policy basis against which to assess the proposal. That's set out in the report. So the site, the house is set down, you'll see in further slides in more detail. Access off the road, there's a workshop garage on this taller, on the top part of the site, and there's a further garage here you just see there. And then looking up towards the Kettleshume direction, you've got the house, a mixture of forms you begin to see in these slides. Mainly the roof you see from the public end on this side, but the key vantage points are from the other side of the valley. You look across and you can see the existing house here and the beginnings of the traditional dwellings on the edge of Kettleshume village there coming into view. So this is the close-up, that principal elevation looking across the valley. There's a mixture of materials, mixture of forms, and a very long frontage. So you'll see as we go through these slides, the house is, or bungalow I should refer it to, is somewhat out of keeping with our local vernacular building tradition, both in form, size, layout, and particularly the materials. So there's a mixture of timber, render, and a small amount of stonework. Again, there's a sloping drive down from the road, parallel with the road, that drops down to a parking area. You see the garage on the left, and a further sort of parking turning area at the bottom. Blue slate roof and some stonework on the back, but that's largely hidden from public vantage points. And then just coming back to that. So our replacement dwelling policy, DMH9, set out in the report, does allow for the principle of a replacement dwelling, where a property like this is significantly out of keeping with the local building tradition. It isn't of any heritage value, which I think we can all clearly agree the existing building isn't that. So the principle of a replacement is acceptable. The key issue in this case is whether or not the proposed replacement, and I'll guide you through the design in a moment, meets the remaining criteria in DMH9. The critical one being that the replacement dwelling, being a larger dwelling, should demonstrate significant overall enhancement. And that's the key test. And as I said earlier, this is a wholly different policy to the one for extending and altering a property, which is constrained by the existing footprint and existing building to a larger extent, and therefore is a much higher bar to pass in terms of impact on landscape and local building tradition. So I'll go through the detailed slides of the proposed replacement dwelling now. So this is the existing footprint of the building as it stands at the moment. So you've got small shed here, storage areas at the bottom. This is the two-storey element and a link structure to the single-storey main body of the house. And that upper
Can I be
garage
clear?
level.
The top of these drawings is the roadside, isn't it?
It is, yes. The road stands to the top of these drawings and open countryside to the bottom. And then just to the right is that existing workshop garage at the top of the site. And as proposed, so this, the left-hand part of the dwelling is largely on a similar footprint, but the right-hand side in this slide is enlarged and has a two-storey form. And if you recall in the description, a new retaining wall is proposed along the back here to retain the rising ground and of the driveway and the bank. So it'd be a three-bedroom dwelling, and the upper area of the new two-storey element would have a entrance terrace and entrance staircase down to the lower level and the master suite. So there's the overall site plan. The roof form is regularised by having a linear roof with this rear extension which is flush with the end there. The materials as we go through will be all in natural stone with a blue slate roof. That's the existing elevation, main elevation. And then as proposed. And as I said earlier, I think apart from this one window here in this elevation, it's virtually identical to the approved scheme of alteration and extensions, which, although that brought some enhancement and was acceptable from an alteration and extension point of view, as set out in the report, isn't sufficient in this case to meet the higher bar for the replacement dwelling policy.
Chair, could I just interrupt John's submission for a moment? What he's saying is it sounds as if his mouse is visible on his screen. It looks as if his mouse is visible on his screen, but it's not on the big screen. So I don't know which window he was... it is now. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it's... I don't see it on mine, you're right. Thank you. It's just that one window difference to the scheme, which is largely identical to the one that we approved for alteration extensions. As I said, it's all in natural stone, blue slate roof, and this is a glazed balustrade on the terrace with a log storage area underneath. You can see there that there's a variety of window styles, door styles, giving quite an unresolved or unbalanced fenestration detail. And overall, you can see the form is much longer than the existing building, 26.5 metres, I think, from 24 metres. So that's uncharacteristic in terms of our local building tradition, as is the complicated plan form and the different forms and window details all contribute to it being significantly out of keeping with the local vernacular. There's no lintels or sills on these windows, the attempt to give it a more contemporary feel, I understand. And when you look at the other elevations, this is the rear facing the road, which is, as you see on the slides, largely screened by the rising ground, but as proposed. And then the gable elevation, so this is looking up the site towards the Kettlesham direction as existing and as proposed. Much wider gables and the lack of articulation on the rear extension, shall we call it, or the rear projecting element, gabled element, contributes to a much wider gable than would be normally appropriate. And then the other elevation, top side looking back down towards the Whaley Bridge direction with the road on the right. And as proposed, you can see the sloping retaining wall structure required to hold back the rising ground. So these are the steps down to this entrance lobby, and at this end will be the master suite, and just a section through the site. So as I say, in the report, I'll just leave that slide on to show the landscape context in a little bit more detail as I conclude. But overall, this complicated plan form, the unresolved fenestration, and the overlong frontage all contribute to it being significantly out of keeping and not achieving the enhancement to landscape impact or to the local built environment through the form has led to the recommendation of refusal by officers. And I would just like, whilst talking for the reason for refusal, I'd just like to make an amendment to that, just to reflect, better reflect the wording in the policy of DMH9 for replacement dwellings. So in the second sentence of the reason for refusal, which starts the design of the proposed replacement dwelling, if we can omit that up to where it says tradition, so omit the sentence that goes, the design of the proposed replacement dwelling does not adequately reflect the local built environment or the established local vernacular building traditions, replace that part of the sentence by the proposed replacement dwelling doesn't enhance the value character of the site itself and the surrounding built environment and landscape, reflecting guidance provided in adopted guidance. And then return to the sentence, and therefore does not meet the high standards necessary to justify demolition and replacement of the existing dwelling. I think that better reflects the intent of the wording of policy DMH9. And for that reason, Chair, back to the committee. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We've got one speaker, Mr. Matt Hurst.
Good morning, members. Thank you for allowing me to speak.
Before you start, should be a little red button on the machine in front of you. If you can turn that on.
Thank you, Mark.
That's
okay?
That should make it work.
I don't normally need a microphone, I'll be honest, but I'll...
But you're being broadcast worldwide.
Okay. Right. So yes, as has been outlined in the Planning Officer's report, this scheme is essentially identical to a previously approved scheme, which is still valid and was deemed suitable for this particular site. The delegated report for the approved scheme judged the proposals against GSP1, GSP2, GSP3 and DMC3 and deemed that it was in accordance with the local plan. The Planning Department's recommendation for this current scheme can only then be based on policy DMH9, which requires a larger replacement dwelling to provide a significant overall enhancement. Given there's no definition for what that enhancement should be, it remains a matter of opinion. We argue that the proposed scheme does represent significant and overall enhancement. The proposals will remove an incongruous building, which is a blight on the landscape. It's going to replace it with a highly energy efficient new home constructed using locally sourced natural stone and slate. And I think it does reflect the local built environment. It's a more contemporary version of that, but it does reflect local built environment and vernacular. The new dwelling will vastly improve the visual amenity of the landscape and the character of the national park. The existing dwelling is leaky, it's really badly constructed, and it leads to massively high energy consumption to keep the house warm. The proposed scheme will use structurally insulated panels and a ground source heat pump, ensuring a very airtight home with very low energy consumption. So I would ask how, given these improvements, how it doesn't represent significant overall enhancement. The planning officer's report for these proposals suggests that the demolition of the property frees us from the constraints which limited the previous design. This is just not the case. The site has major restrictions which continue to dictate the design of any dwelling on that site. It's long and narrow. It's got a very high retaining wall to the back and a hill and a road to the southeast which blocks out a lot of the natural light from that elevation, which naturally leads to a linear house with windows on the other elevation where most of the natural light has to come from. We did suggest several amendments to the officer to try and ease their concerns, but none of them seemed acceptable to him. The only reason that we're not implementing the previous scheme is because the existing retaining wall is failing. It needs to be rebuilt to prevent the driveway dropping onto the house and also Macclesfield Road, which is partially held up by this wall. It's a serious health and safety issue, and it could result in major costs for the council in order to repair that if it does fail. In conclusion, it's a design that's already been deemed acceptable by the planning department in terms of size, scale and appearance. And in approving the previous scheme, they concluded that the proposed development would conserve and enhance the character and appearance of the wider landscape. So I don't really see that that has changed massively. But given that the current proposals will include repair of retaining wall that's holding up the highway, removal of an eyesore, and the construction of this highly energy efficient stone-built dwelling, I think it does represent significant overall enhancement.
Okay, thank you. I must stop you there, if I may.
Thank you.
Right, members, the first one I've got is Andrew Hart.
Right, I'm struggling with this a little bit. Can please interpret the differences between the scheme that's passed, the extension scheme, and the scheme that we're looking at now? What are the similarities? What are the discrepancies? What are the differences? Please.
I think it's. I should have put this. Somebody left these. Oh, can you turn the microphone on the speaker? Thank you. Yeah, the only difference, as far as I can see, is that. Let me just see. Is that where's the mouse? Is that window there? If I'm correct, I don't have the other slide, but. Yeah, the applicant's nodding in concurrence. So that's the only difference, effectively. I think the rear elevation is identical as well.
So we're arguing over a window?
No, we're not arguing over a window. As I set out, the policy has a much higher bar to achieve. It's a completely different type of development than the alteration or extension. If you think an alteration or extension application is under policy DMC3, it's constrained by the fact you're just altering an existing building. There's no need to remove the existing building. You're altering and leaving the existing building substantive in place. Extensions are generally about 25% or just altering part of an existing building. As soon as you're talking about a replacement dwelling, it's a whole new building, a different policy starting point altogether. And that's set out in DMH9 in the local plan. And the supporting statements or explanatory memorandum about that policy set out what's required. They make it very clear that you have to achieve significant enhancement to the landscape and to the built environment with the replacement dwelling. So it's a much higher bar than the alterations or extensions. So yes, I acknowledge that it's virtually identical to what we've already approved, but there were significant constraints then, and we talk about a wholly different development and a different policy starting point. They're the key issues.
Right, okay. So does it meet CC1, this new application? As far as you're concerned, you know, are the environmental criteria that we set down for properties, is it compliant with CC1?
Yes, we're more than happy with it meeting that, with the range of measures that are set out in the report, yes.
Right. Third question and final question. Would the extension, the original scheme, which we've given approval for, would that have met CC1?
It must have done for us to approve it. I can't remember whether all the detail is exactly the same, but it would have done in order to achieve approval under our policies, even for alteration extensions. But it would be a lower bar to meet because you're just altering an existing building, so you're limited. You know, you can't change the whole house, but within the extension part, you would need to achieve that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Right. Mike Chaplin.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, two questions. Had they set about implementing the scheme that was previously agreed, and then found that that retaining wall needed extensive rebuilding work, would that have stopped them from getting that rebuilding work done?
I imagine it would have done, but I don't know. That would be a matter for the builder. But it'd be difficult to believe that somebody would start work like that without understanding the impact or the relationship with a major retaining structure like that, which is well known about. So that scenario shouldn't really happen. Really, it should be planned in advance. And I don't think they started the permission. It's still extant, but hence why they've come back to us with this proposal, which effectively shifts the house slightly further forward to make room for that retaining structure as well.
Yeah, the other thing relates to biodiversity, which is coming in now. Is it because the scheme has, this planning application has come in before the new regulations? Yeah. Thank you.
Right. Any other members? Ken?
Thank you, Chair. From what wasn't clear to me in reading the report was why the dwelling had to be moved 2 metres. Why isn't it possible? Do we have an engineering report on the issues to do with the retaining wall that seems to be the driver for moving the dwelling? Is it that it's not possible to replace that without moving the dwelling? And the supplementary to that would be, in terms of sustainability, is it really necessary to completely demolish a building and then rebuild in new materials when there's an extant permission to refurbish the existing building?
I think in answer to your question, obviously, I haven't seen any structural report, so we've taken it as read that there's a need to construct or rebuild the retaining structure. But if you're doing major engineering operations like that at the back of the house, plus the permission you've got for the house alteration extensions is so extensive as to take so much of the existing building away and reclad it, etc., there comes a tipping point between whether it's more cost effective or appropriate to make that leap that little bit further forward to make it easier to build and much better in terms of incorporating means of construction to have a more sustainable dwelling. So we often get this where people with extensive alteration extensions come to us and say, well, it's almost like tantamount to rebuilding. And there comes a point where it's worth doing that. But the question as to whether it could be rebuilt on its existing footprint and still carry out the retaining wall, if you look at where the existing dwelling is, the retaining structure, it looks like the existing retaining structure is in 2 parts, but probably principally in this area here. I haven't got the details of that, but when you look at the proposed design, this is where the retaining structure is. So I think potentially you could have done it. It might be more difficult, but I haven't looked into that in any detail. We've taken it as read that they wanted to carry out both at the same time.
Matt, and then I'm going to ask a question as well.
Yeah, the speaker said about the impact from the county council. Have we got a report in support of the application from the county council? Because you know, if it's something which is so important to the county council that it has to be done, why aren't the county council paying for it? And why? And have we got? Is there a letter of support from? You know, is there a recommendation from the county council to do the piece of work that they're saying to do?
We've got a response from the Cheshire Council Transport team. They raised no objection, subject to a condition requiring the construction management statement to be submitted and approved prior to work commencing on site. So, obviously, with major works near the highway, they need to be involved to make sure that they be carried out in a safe way that doesn't affect the integrity of the highway. But other than that, they've raised no objections. I haven't personally read any structural report or seen any report submitted as part of this application. I'm sure the planning officer who dealt with it would have had that conversation with the agent stroke applicant and has satisfied themselves. And in the light of no comments or no harm or issues raised by Cheshire East, we're happy that that issue can be resolved through condition.
Can I just try and get clear in my mind? I'm picking up the line of questioning that Andrew Hart started. The features of this development that we object to, I mean, you've talked about the length of the building, which I think I understand, but you also talked about things like the fenestration and so forth. If the fenestration is objectionable here, why wouldn't it have been objectionable on the original proposal to amend the to change the original house? You understand the question? And there will be there will be other features where the same question arises, if you see what I mean, because these are quite detailed things where you would say we want a standard of design, and if we thought that was okay in one situation, I mean, I don't like it very much myself, but that's not the issue. The issue is, what are the grounds for refusing it? But if we thought they were okay a few years ago, why aren't they okay now?
Well, the starting point is different. As I said, it's a materially different development, different policy basis. But if you look at the existing house, you go back to the slides in a moment, the existing house exhibits a whole series of features, quite overglazed in parts. So this, although it was recognised in the alteration and extensions approval that this resulted in quite a change, there's improved materials, and it was recognised that the window arrangement, which was reduced in the final approval from what was submitted, was a more contemporary approach, and on balance it was felt to overall that scheme provided just enough enhancement to justify approval at that time. But it was recognised that that fenestration would ordinarily not be acceptable had it not been for the very low sort of starting point that we have with the existing building.
Well, members.
Can I, Chair, can I just kind of, for my own understanding, to summarise the way I see it from what John has just said, is that the permission that exists is seeking to do the best of a bad job because it's limited as to what is achievable with changing a pre-existing building, whereas as proposed an eyesore, but we seem to be...
I do understand that's the argument. What I'm still working out is why something as simple as a window design is acceptable on one but not on the other. That's because the window design wasn't dependent... the original conversion wasn't dependent upon window design. It was dependent upon enlarging the building to make it occupiable, and the window design could have been argued about at that stage. I must admit I thought this was straightforward, but I'm getting finding it more complicated. Any other members wish to contribute to the discussion? In that case, has any member got a proposal to put? You're going to move the recommendation. Is that seconded? Are there any amendments to that motion? In that case, I will put the motion to the vote. All those in favour of refusing this application on the grounds as amended set out in the report. All those in favour? Those against? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That motion is lost. Does somebody else have a motion to put? Well, the only other motion is to actually approve it. So is somebody going to put that forward? Okay, that's seconded. Are there any amendments to that? In that case, I'll put that motion to the vote. All those in favour of approving it? Oh, conditions first.
Yes, I think in the event of approval, we ought to be considering conditions. So I have some suggestions, so members can add or subtract from these as they see fit. But if you are to approve it, there would be the standard commencement condition within 3 years of the development, definition of approved plans, prior to the works taking place, the submission agreement of a demolition and construction management plan, Fourth condition, details to be agreed for the precise levels of the replacement dwelling. Fifth, sample panels for external walling. Sixth is agree the precise details of the windows and doors. Recessing of those in 7. Sample of the slate for the new roof, 8. Agree details of the, I've got here air source heat pump. I heard the applicant say ground source heat pump, so agree details of the
Heat pump.
sustainable measures, heat pump. Sorry. And then there's the agreed details of the proposed sewage package treatment plant. Also written verification that the development has been carried out in accordance with the sustainability statement. I've got here that the omitting the glass balustrade to the terrace in favour of dark railings instead. No external lighting except in accordance with the scheme to be agreed. Picking up the 1 electric vehicle charging point that's required. Detailed condition about rainwater goods, roof verges, and then finally removing permitted development rights for alterations and further extensions without our prior approval. And a footnote about from United Utilities, because there are pipelines in the area that's required to be checked before any redevelopment. So they're the suggested conditions from officers, Chair.
Can I just be absolutely clear? The condition about the glass railings being changed, why is that necessary?
Because of the reflectivity, looking across the valley with these glazed balustrades tend to reflect the sky and be quite a strident feature in the wider landscape.
Thank you, Dave.
Do we need to put anything in about the retaining wall?
The retaining wall, as I understand it, is a problem for Cheshire East Council. It's holding up their highway.
They would be responsible.
Yes, I'm sure they would. Okay, those are the suggested conditions. Sorry, Rachel.
Is there anything in there about SUDS, sustainable and urban drainage? I know you talked about rainwater collection from the roof, but sort of what about in the landscaping in the gardens? Thanks.
Yes, thanks for that comment. It's not required for this sort of scale of scheme, and that will be dealt with under the building regulations ordinarily, something like this. Thank you.
Okay, those are the suggested conditions. You're still happy to propose that, and it was seconded by, I think, Dermot. All those in favour of approving it on those terms? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Those against? 1, 2, 3. No, I shall abstain on this occasion. That is approved. We'll move on now to agenda item 7, which is Hope Farm, Alstonfield. And T'other John, I presume, is going to deal with this. Sorry, I forgot to bring you in. Sorry. Beg your pardon. Should have nudged me.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Yes, so this is item 7, application. This application seeks planning permission to allow the replacement of an agricultural building with a new dwelling at Hope Farm, Alstonfield. This application was previously brought to committee March 2024, at which point it was deferred. There was a discussion at that point regarding the submitted design, which was felt did not provide particular enhancement to the area. Therefore, members requested that the item be deferred to allow further discussion between officers and applicants. The application at that point was recommended for refusal. It was deferred and is now being brought back as today. In terms of the site, so you can see the site plan on the screen there. Hope Farm stands in open countryside off the south side of Hopedale Road, opposite the junction of Fairlong Lane, approximately 680 metres to the southwest of Alstonfield, which is the nearest named settlement in policy DS1. So, slightly closer view of the site plan. The site itself comprises of 2 distinct yards. The building subject of the replacement is currently a long, narrow, single-storey former cattle building, which spans both yards, though mainly being in the southern yard. The building is deemed to be of no historic or vernacular merit. So the focus of the slides will be effectively just to show you the changes that have been made between the previous application brought to committee in March and what has been brought forward today. But first, I'll show the photographs as a reminder of the site. So this is from the roadside. This is showing the rear of the building. Unfortunately, can't quite. It's essentially centre of that photograph. The long linear building in the centre, just beyond the pole barn. This is the entrance to the site. This is the building here, proposed replacements. This is the opposite end of the building, nearest the Hope farmhouse. You can see a small lean-to projecting from the front elevation. Now, in terms of the plans, again, the main focus will be on the changes between what was originally previously proposed and what is now proposed. So this is the existing ground floor plan. As I say, very simple linear form. This was the March proposal. So effectively keeping that linear form. The changes that have been made are pretty limited, but the focus will be on what we see on the next slide, which is just the projecting gables. So we have one larger one to the front and a small one to the rear. The elevational plans will show that more clearly. Again, this is the existing front elevation. There's the small lean-to pointed out on the photograph. This was what was proposed in March. Again, effectively the form was retained. And we have now this proposal, which is, again, small lean-to, small additional detailing, and then a large gable to the front with a chimney. If we go to the sides, this is the existing side elevation. Again, what was proposed in March, and now what is proposed today. So you can see the large front gable, and then a smaller gable to the rear, and the coin details, and the surrounds to the windows. Obviously the chimney as well. Again, this is the existing rear elevation. Proposed rear elevation in March, and what we see today, again, small gable, small additional details, and almost there with these slides. This is existing side elevation, proposed in March, and what is proposed again, so you can see the gables either side. So the application was recommended for refusal. So that was the first come back to today. Fundamentally, the recommendation of the authority is that the application does not comply with policy HC1, which states that provision will not be made for housing solely to meet an open market demand, and sets out the exceptional circumstances where new housing can be accepted in the open countryside. This proposal does not meet any of the exceptional circumstances set out in HC1 and is therefore not deemed acceptable in principle. Following on from the March committee, there was just the question of whether this could be subject of enhancement in line with GSP2 of the core strategy, and the applicants and agents went away to try to bring forward an enhancement. Recommendation of officers remains the fact that this would not bring forth an enhancement. As a result of the latest amendments, it is the view that the design of the amended proposed dwelling fails to conserve and enhance the value character of the area and is not of truly outstanding quality, which would be as a reference to paragraph 84 of the NPPF. The amended proposal, as we see today, has not improved on the initial submission, producing what would appear more so a bungalow development than a building seeking to be reflective of a traditional farmstead character. I therefore would draw attention to refusal reasons listed under section 11 of the report. Reason 1 states that the applicant does not have an eligible local need for new housing, which is one of the exceptions within HC1, and therefore is contrary to policy HC1A. I would like to put forward an update to reason number 2 to provide further detail to number 2. So it should read as follows. In this instance, there are no exceptional circumstances as required by HC1 and would not bring forward enhancements as required by GSP2. And furthermore, there are no other material planning considerations that would justify a departure from the authority's adopted housing policies. So that effectively is the recommendation. One further final update is that we did receive a committee statement submitted by the agents on behalf of the applicant. This is effectively a restatement of the case. This has been uploaded to the planning application file, which has been visible for members. Yes, so I have nothing further to add, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We've got one speaker, Mr. Hamling, is returning to see us. Good morning.
Our first application to convert this dilapidated building was refused as it was not in keeping with the local area. It was your suggestion to reapply rebuilding the barn in local stone. This was put before you in March, motion for approval, seconded but not voted on, but deferred for a possible different design. It was stated by you that we would be contacted by an officer to help us with what would be acceptable, but all we received was a copy of the policy which explained nothing. When queried by our architect, they were told it had to be a grand design. We then spent many hours looking at designs, many with split levels, but this either made it too tall in relation to the main house or subterranean with no view. It's almost meant stairs, which for possible hereditary medical reason we are trying to avoid in our later life. A modern grand design simply would not be in keeping with the local area, and as our first application was refused for that reason, we couldn't see that this would be acceptable by you and definitely not by all our close neighbours who have continued to fully support our applications. GSB2 highlights that opportunity should be taken to enhance the park by removal of undesirable buildings, and this must be undertaken in a manner which conserves the value characteristics of the site and surroundings. This has always been our aim, blending in with the local surroundings, neighbouring traditional buildings, some of which are single-storey, and in numerous supporting letters the neighbours want to improve the view, something traditional and full-time residents contributing to the community, and definitely not more holiday lets. Members were worried about the justification of us living there. One member correctly said that we are succession planning. There are no open market dwellings available in the village, and it was stated in March meeting by Councillor Potter that figures for new builds in the park are extremely low. 2022 to 23, only 7 were approved. So surely the reuse of existing redundant buildings would be more desirable. We were told by an officer the building could be made into holiday lets or a workshop, so it's only us living there that is the problem. We are about to retire and this will be our forever home. It's not for open market housing. With the hike of cost of living, our daughter and husband both have to work full time to pay their mortgage and source expensive childcare, which is crippling that generation. Hence the need for having free grandma and grandpa childcare services that will be within walking distance, not in Essex, thus reducing our carbon emissions by 100%. So simply for the sake of our family and the environment, this redundant barn is the ideal option. It'll also give local builders much needed work. There is an opportunity for the park to get rid of an eyesore in a dwindling community and replace it with a beautiful traditional new building with residents who are willing to participate in local activities and help boost the local community. Also, although the constant focus on this application seems to be finding a policy that fits, shouldn't local public opinion also be taken into consideration? This is fully supported by all the local residents and shows, regardless of policies, that this would not only enhance the local area, but also the Peaks Park.
Thank you very much. Well timed.
I will take any questions. Quite happy.
Right. This is one which did come before us about 3 months ago, must have been. And I think there was some sympathy with what was trying to be achieved here, but there was also some concern about the character of the development, and I think that's probably where we still are in general terms. I must admit, I'm not getting this bit about grand designs. I don't think members ever got into that area of thinking.
Yeah. I mean, It's true that there's a final exemption in national planning policy for residential development in the open countryside of England as a whole, where you can demonstrate outstanding design. The consistency of that with our approach is actually quoted quite nicely by the applicant here. So it is about either applying our core housing policies, so it supports local need for housing, it could be a farm use, there could be an ancillary use, you could actually find way of bringing in family care into those kind of situations with a subordinate building through ancillary accommodation. But we have quite a firm line on the introduction of market houses into the national park because there's no need for that. That's one of those constraints, and we have limited exceptions for that. Unless, and we have seen one or two examples of this in the park, unless we can see significant enhancement to the valid characteristics of the area. So that's where you would really, I think, go to the other design shot. We'd be really looking at the contribution, if take that one for instance, that makes to the building tradition, and we're saying that doesn't happen in this case. It hasn't gone to the extent of significant enhancement to the national park. A grand design in other respects would have to demonstrate the same thing. I think in our case it would still have to reflect the building tradition. It's principally the kind of last opportunity in a hierarchy of policies, having not satisfied those other ones about local need, farming and ancillary. And really we don't think the level of design is sufficient to really demonstrate an enhancement to that farm group.
Right. Members. Ginny?
Thank you, Brian. Can I just ask, what sort of enhancement would you be looking for?
I can do. It's difficult to say. It's a very high level of bar in terms of what's required. In terms of outstanding architecture, is something normally innovative that's not been done before, but with what we normally say when we're talking to is with a strong handshake with the local vernacular. So you perhaps pick up on the local form, local materials, but then look at contemporary detailing or an architectural standard which is so high that you consider it to be outstanding. In this case, we don't feel that this design has reached that standard. It's it's contemporary in some ways, but it's pastiche and vernacular in others. In our view, it would look like a fairly modern bungalow in its form and appearance. So it's something that's not uncommon to see. So we don't feel at this stage that this design would hit that high standard. And that is, as Brian pointed out, the very end, the very final exception in a list of exceptions where we might approve housing. It's a very high bar of design to approve that sort of scheme, especially in a national park.
Aren't we slightly confusing two issues here? With you a moment, Andrew. Aren't we slightly confusing two issues here? Of course, if you're going to be building a new open market house in the open countryside, in normal circumstances, greenfield site and all the rest of it, you will go in for the high architectural design, innovative design, the exceptions that are in the MPPF. But and that's a perfectly valid way of thinking. But there's another thing, which is what I thought Brian was saying, which is that within the national park, if you can achieve a high degree of enhancement on a particular site, of course, good design must come into it, but the key issue is whether you can achieve the enhancement, and it doesn't necessarily involve innovative, all the rest sorts of design. Would you like to deal with that?
I mean, it is important that the word enhancement in our policy language is a direct return to our purposes language, so to conserve and enhance the special qualities of the national park. It isn't just something better in itself, it actually has to reflect the character of the area, because that's what we're here to do. You take something that isn't contributing and you turn it into something that is by recognition of the local character. So that word enhance has to be used in the right way by recognition of our special qualities of this national park.
Oh, I've got two names. Sorry, I've got Andrew first and then Ken.
Chair, when we defer stuff, there's usually a good reason, and don't we normally expect that there should be a bit of a two-way street? Because we're giving a hint by deferring it that we want people to work together to achieve something. And, you know, what sort of attempts have been made to enhance that two-way street? To get the sort of things, the message over to the applicant about what the planning department would like to see. Has that been done?
I spoke to the agent after it was deferred and advised, essentially on the lines me and Brian have just said, the sort of the policy routes that potentially could allow for a design. At that stage, I didn't have a scheme in front of me. I had that discussion with the agent about the principles behind it, which obviously then they went and looked at options and submitted these set of amended plans. These, as they've been received, as we've said, don't reach that standard, and in our view, don't reach them by quite a significant margin. So it was felt best to bring the application back to committee so members could make a decision now to see where we are. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, but we have to make an effort to try and get what we need to achieve. And I'm wondering whether it's fallen short a little bit here. Picking up the phone sometimes to people saying, nice try, but no cigar. Try again. Just a feeling I've got, that's all, Chair. Thank you.
Ken?
Thank you, Chair. I can understand and sympathise with the requirements of the applicant to be near the family. I can understand why neighbours might want to look out from over something that isn't a 20th century brick built now an eyesore. I had issues with the previous application and didn't vote for it. I have issues with this, not least in the ways in which historically that building would have functioned by facing into the farmyard, and the northern side had minimal fenestration. What's being proposed now, and therefore it had minimal impact on the landscape, the open landscape to the north. What's being proposed now is much more extensive fenestration, plus a garden area that extends into the field to the north. And it seems to me that that is a significant impact on the character of the landscape, which is inappropriate. And in terms of light pollution and the rest from that increased fenestration is going to impact significantly on the character of the surrounding landscape. I don't think, and I agree with officers in this, I don't think that this design reflects really anything in the local vernacular, and I don't think that on the basis of where we've got to so far that there's ever likely to be anything that comes forward that is going to achieve that. For me as well, I think the other significant policy issues are summarised in paragraphs 48 to 51. There's a requirement to create, there's a desire to create a new planning unit, which, according to the report, does create a market dwelling, which wasn't what was presented by the applicant. It's not an affordable dwelling. It's not an essential workers' dwelling. It doesn't constitute redevelopment, and it doesn't comply with HC1A, B, or C. It seems to me, Chair, that on design grounds, on policy grounds, on impacts on the local landscape, this really isn't acceptable. And I couldn't support the application. In fact, Chair, I'll move the recommendation.
Thank you, Nick. Matt, I've got you next.
It's quite a frustrating application. I remember asking about the fact that there's an eyesore there which we could do something about. So enhancement in terms of this building, you know, with its asbestos concrete roof, and I can't see how that can possibly be. You know, nothing is going to happen with that until it falls down. It's only going to get worse. We go back to Andrew's point. I think that we need to be having conversations about this, because I think that this development as it's come to us now is significantly worse than the one that came to us before, and I don't understand why we've I wouldn't support this development, but I definitely do support the principle of development, because of what's going to happen to that building in a fairly short period of time. Please, can we have a conversation about it to make sure that an application comes through which is acceptable?
Okay, well, I have a motion to refuse on the grounds set up in the report. Can I just talk about those grounds? Because at least one of the issues is about the standard of design, which I don't think comes over very clearly in the grounds for refusal. So we need to accommodate that, I think, in the reasons for refusal. Has somebody seconded Ken's? They haven't, have they? No. Well, I'll second it. That's fine. Or Mike has seconded it.
No, it's just I'm happy to second it, but I do think there is a scheme there that would work on that site. Yeah. I'm still convinced of that, which may differ from one or two other members and their views, but I just don't think the applicant has got there yet. And I take Matthew's point that I think we may well have gone a step backwards rather than a step forwards in getting to that point.
So can I interpret I don't know whether Ken will agree with this or not, actually, and it's very important to know whether you will or you won't, that interpret the motion as being to refuse on those grounds, but to pick up the point that's being made by members that the conversation should continue. Is that...
I'm happy to go along with that, Chair. My comments were directed at what's in front of us.
Yes, no, well, I think that's right. Right, it's been proposed and seconded. Has any member got an amendment? In that case, I'm going to put that to the vote. All those in favour of refusing on the grounds set out and on the basis of further conversations. All those in favour? Those against? Those abstaining? 3. Okay, that's carried, and you've got the message. Right, I'm now moving on to agenda item 8, which is the report on planning appeals. I think we're ticking along fairly steadily on these. We're up 1 year, down the next, but it seems to be straightforward. There's nothing in this report. Any members got any comments to make on it? In that case, can I move that we note it? Seconded. All those in favour of noting? Thank you very much. And then move on to agenda item 9, the planning appeals report. I think the one of note is over the page, the land at Middle Hay, Cressbrookdale, which was a subject of some considerable debate. It's not a decision that surprised me, I have to say, but otherwise, can that be noted? All those in favour of noting? Anyone against? That's noted. And that completes the agenda at 11 o'clock. So, Bill.
I think I mentioned this before when I first joined the committee, but I would find it really helpful, because that's an annual report, whether there could be an annual or periodic reports on the number of applications received and the number approved, because I have it in mind. I still don't have an idea, but I think it's in the vast number of applications received are approved, and I think I have that in my mind, and I think that's an important thing to know, because we you know, there is a public perception that, you know, which is untrue, that the Peak Park refuses everything. It's a sort of blanket stereotype. So I personally would find helpful, I don't know, obviously there's, I don't know how the statistics add up, to have some sort of regular, annual or more frequent of how many applications are received and how many refused, how many are approved, how many are refused. And then obviously there's the appeal process as well, which then is a smaller number. Is that would people find that helpful?
Before you answer, Brian, we used to receive an annual report on development control, which I think contained that information, didn't it? For some reason or other, we've stopped receiving it.
We haven't had that for several years.
But wasn't it a statutory requirement that we had it and that we approved it? Could we look at that? Pick up Bill's point anyway, but the two together.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's just some technical points I'll need to look at with that. There is some standard data that goes back to government, but under certain categories of development, so non-major, householder, major applications, but not all of the discharge conditions and not all of the Section 73s, and you know, so there's a bit of unpicking, but there are definitely data sets there we can give. I mean, when I give that information back under those data sets to government, commonly the calculations I see are like above 80% approval rate.
Okay, well, we'll try and pick that up, Bill. I'm very happy to take further questions because we're going to be here for another hour or two. Is this relevant to the meeting or after the meeting?
I'm now, for the past couple of months, I've been getting a monthly report of all delegated decisions as to whether they've been accepted or rejected. So we're getting the raw data.
We do get that. Okay, I'm going to close the meeting. I'm going to give, 10 minutes just for